welcome back to Watercolorish. I know it's been a while and I'll share the reason for that at the end of this video if you're curious, but first let's talk some more about fixing mistakes in watercolor. I'm going to walk you through some of the difficulties I encountered in one of my recent paintings, which is not actually here in the studio. I don't know why I'm pointing over there, but here's an image of it here, and we'll go through some of the problems that arose while I was working on this little guy. Now, this video is a continuation of Fixing Mistakes Part 1, in which we talked about lifting off color using a damp sable brush and scrubbing color out using these short-haired nylon bristle brushes. Today, we're going to extend both those methods and talk about scraping color off with an X-Acto knife and also with fine grit sandpaper. And we'll talk about the consequences of distressing your paper with those tools as well. So, one thing very quickly. First, I am really sorry about the ads. I mean, out of nowhere, YouTube, what the heck? I was hoping my little channel would stay ad-free for a little longer, but clearly we have now awakened the beast. And that's happened because you guys have been watching and subscribing, so thank you. I really appreciate the interest, and I'll try to make it worth your while. So let's get back to fixing mistakes in watercolor. You may know from my previous videos or from my Instagram that I like to paint these dense, dark backgrounds that I usually do in one big wash that has to be towards the end of my process, which also means that I have to carefully mask everything I've painted before. The masking I do mostly with drafting tape. It looks just like masking tape. They're easy to confuse, but do not use masking tape on watercolor paper, and do not use this kind of white artist type either, because both will mess up your paper in a big way. Drafting tape can occasionally make your paper a little fuzzy when you peel it off, and it can also lift off sedimentary colors, which is one of the reasons I like to use staining colors. We'll talk about the difference in a future video. But I've found more often that when drafting tape fails, it fails by not sticking enough rather than too much, meaning it allows the paint to seep underneath the tape, which is exactly what happened in this little octopus painting of mine. Just like last time, the tape fail in my previous Fixing Mistakes video, this looks like a total fiasco, right? It really gets your heart racing when you peel off the tape expecting a clean, crisp boundary and then find all that dark, dark paint where it's not supposed to be. But if this happens to you, don't despair. There is hope. We do have tricks. Just keep watching. So the first thing I'm going to do is just put a piece of drafting tape along the outside edge of this jar, right next to where some of the leakage occurred. And then I'm going to dampen some of that unwanted paint with a fairly soft brush, and then blot it firmly with a paper towel just to lift some of the loose paint off. This is the first technique we talked about in the last Fixing Mistakes video, and it's the first and least destructive of the 4 error correction methods I'm going to use on this painting now. You can see that the spots I'm working on are getting a little lighter, but they're still very green. And the reason for that is this background color is a mix of lunar black and phthalo green. Now, lunar black is a fairly gritty sedimentary color, which means it's easier to lift off like this, whereas phthalo green is a very fine-grained, deeply penetrating and intense staining pigment, which is great when it lands right where you want it. The upside of staining pigments is that you can get deep color saturation and smooth, even washes, and your earlier work is not disturbed as much when you wash over it again. But their staining qualities also make it way harder to make corrections, as you see here. But I'm not out of tricks yet. This is just step 1, to remove as much of the paint that's sitting right on the surface as we can without harming the paper. So I'm going to speed up this part here, since you've seen how this works before, and then we can get on to the next 3 steps. So for this next step, I'm cutting another piece of tape and putting it parallel to the first piece, because what we're about to do will distress the paper a bit more, and I want to limit the area that's affected. And also I'm adding this diagonal piece at the top that's cut in a slight curve, so there will be a crisp boundary right there at the waterline. I don't want a sharp boundary like that on the lower end of this area, because the color there fades out gradually. So now I'm using one of my short-haired nylon bristle brushes from Creative Mark, which I've gotten slightly damp, to scrub off more color. This unravels the paper fiber somewhat to remove color that is sunk deeper into the paper, which is what I want. But those unraveled paper fibers will also make it difficult to paint over this area again, as I might have mentioned. You might be able to get away with a very light wash or some careful dry brush touch-ups, but those loosened paper fibers tend to wick the paint in unexpected directions and can darken in unexpected ways too. So this area should be treated very carefully after we abuse the paper like this. You might just want to consider it finished or mostly finished. And I know we covered this nylon bristle brush business in my previous Fixing Mistakes video, but steps 3 and 4 coming up will be new. I just have to do these things in order because they're increasingly destructive in terms of roughing up the paper surface. So you can see I'm still scrubbing away and blotting, and as you can see I'm getting a little more color off, as well as some little chunks of my paper that have come loose. But that phthalo green is just a very stainy mofo. It's stubborn and persistent and just doesn't know when to let go. So if you're working on cheaper, thinner student paper, you may find your paper's not going to hold up to this kind of prolonged abuse, which is why you should consider spending a few bucks more on the good stuff, in my opinion. But the other thing you need is quite a lot of patience, as you can see. And even with that, it's becoming clear we're not going to get it all cleaned up. But we have some more tricks. Peeling off the tape. Stay tuned. I'm sure you're right on the edge of your seat. Doing a little blow dry, and then we're on to step 3. So my next step is to scratch off some more color with the sharp tip of an X-Acto knife. You'll notice that the scrubbing I did in the previous step has really made the stains I started with way less dark. I mean, I guess you could say lighter. They're way lighter, which is what we want. We just have some little spots and squiggles remaining, for which the knife tip is the perfect tool because it really focuses what it does onto a single point, whereas the nylon scrubbing brush is a blunter tool that works over a larger area. But unlike with the nylon scrubber, it's important that your paper is completely dry before you start scratching with a knife tip like this. That's why I was blow drying for a while. Otherwise, you can quickly dig a deep canyon into your paper if it's soft and wet. And even when you're working dry, the knife tip does chew up the paper a bit more than the scrubber. So be careful about painting on or near an area that has been scratched up like this. Notice most of my knife movements are parallel to or directed away from the edge of the jar so I don't accidentally scratch into the background. And I'm also changing the direction of knife movements in each area, which helps scratch off any loose paper fibers. And it also helps prevent me from cutting into the paper too deeply. You don't want to gouge a deep groove by repeating the same motion in the same direction in one spot. I'm going to speed this up again because I'm sure you're getting the point. So this is the last thing I'm going to do to fix up this area, and I'm masking it again with drafting tape because this next tool is way less precise than any of our previous ones. I'm actually going to sand the whole section now with fine grit sandpaper. You want to find sandpaper that has a high grit number. I like to use 220. That's the number on the front of the box, and each sheet has the number on the back somewhere as well. And I prefer to cut a small triangular piece because it's easy to hold, and the sharp corners are useful for focusing on a small area when you need to, but you can cut out whatever shape you prefer. So, important caveat, this is a method you should apply only if you are painting on hot press watercolor paper, because hot press is smooth. If you're painting on cold press or rough textured paper, sanding your paper will produce very uneven results, so that's not recommended. You could try it as an experiment, but brace yourself for disappointment. Hot press only in general. And you can see I'm moving the sandpaper parallel to the jar edge. I do have that tape there to protect the background, but I don't really trust it to not peel back if I get a little too wild. The sandpaper removes more of the unwanted paint, and it generally lightens the whole area, and it also smooths out some of the roughness created by our earlier scrubbing and scratching. Does that mean you can paint over it again? Well, the answer is a very little bit, with caution. It's not like painting on new paper, and I think you would be disappointed if you tried to paint fine details over a spot like this. But I did one light wash over this whole area right at the end, which I didn't capture on video, but we can compare the end result to what I started with. Here's the original tape leakage mess, just to remind you how bad it was. And here's the end result. So to summarize our whole journey, I applied 4 different error correction methods. First, lifting color off with a damp brush and paper towel, then scrubbing with a damp bristle brush, then scratching the dry paper with an X-Acto knife tip, and finally sanding the area with fine grit sandpaper, which you should only do on hot press paper. So that's it for now. I hope to post some new videos soon, and I'm really sorry about the long hiatus before this video. One of the big distractions I've had this spring, besides having a solo show coming up in Westport, Connecticut this month, is that we fostered to adopt a very sweet rescue husky who turned out to be pregnant. So we had 7 dogs in the house for the last 2 months, which was fun, but crazy and exhausting as well. The pups are all now living in foster homes and being placed for adoption by a local rescue organization, so happy ending there. Anyway, thanks for watching, and please feel free to share your thoughts and questions in the comments, and I hope you will keep painting and learning, and subscribe to Watercolorish if you want to see more of my watercolor painting videos.